Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, what happens when your EV, your electric car, breaks down away from your home? And if you're far away from your home in a very rural area, can you rely on breakdown services or might you be stranded? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in the first half of this podcast today. I'm here with Darragh Nolan from the Irish Independent, but I'm going to be doing most of the talking for the next 10 minutes because this is a story about what happened to me 2 weekends ago. On the bank holiday weekend, I took my 10-month-old car, which is a Volkswagen ID3. I like the car, before anybody asks. I took it down the Wild Atlantic Way to a remote part of rural Mayo. I'd say there were a lot of people from Dublin and from Irish cities who took their cars to remote parts of the country, which is about a third of Ireland. About a third of the landmass of Ireland are remote rural areas, but particularly along the Wild Atlantic Way for a bank holiday weekend, a break for 2 nights. So I took it down, and on the Sunday, at about 11 o'clock in the morning, I noticed that it wouldn't start. My 10-month-old ID3 wouldn't start. Now, I Googled to see what was going on because everything else was charged and it was fine. It was working. The electrics and the heating and the radio and everything else was working in it, but it just wouldn't start. So I did some Googling and it appeared that there might be an issue with the brake pedal. That didn't turn out to be the case, as I'll get to. But anyway, it wouldn't start. So Volkswagen is the country's best-selling brand of electric car. The ID4 regularly, no, not regularly, always over the last 3 years, it's always the top-selling electric car in Ireland. And Volkswagen has what it calls a mobility guarantee for EVs, for electric cars. And what that means is that it understands that some people are still reticent. They're interested in electric cars, but they're reticent to take the plunge and buy one, particularly the more expensive ones over 40, 50 grand. My car, for example, cost €42,000. And a lot of people have seen stories about range issues or depreciation, and those are to a lesser or greater extent real. But one of the big things they're worried about is being stranded if they go away, for example, on a bank holiday weekend. Will they have the range to get back home? Will there be enough infrastructure or public chargers to get back? But in a worst case scenario, if you actually break down, that's when you really want to know that you won't be stranded. So Volkswagen has what it calls a mobility guarantee for its electric cars. And that is, if your new car breaks down, it will, quote, guarantee to keep you mobile, quote, around the clock. And this includes, it promises, a, quote, on-the-spot fix and or a tow and a hire car and even accommodation if you're put out. Now, what I experienced between Sunday at 11 o'clock and for over the next 40 hours was a slightly different experience. So I called, after trying everything I could, at about midday on Sunday, I called for help. And I was told that a professional, somebody to fix it, will be out to me within 90 minutes and that it might be fixed on the spot. Important to clarify, by the way, that I called Volkswagen's breakdown assistance. I was trying to take advantage of this mobility guarantee that Volkswagen offers. An hour later, after I made that call, I was called back by the AA. So that is Volkswagen's breakdown partner. Now, I only realized later on that when I was calling Volkswagen, I was actually calling the AA. They answer the phone by saying Volkswagen assistance, because that's what they're contracted to do, but it's actually the AA. So an hour later, 1 p.m., I'm called back by the AA to say that it would be, in fact, a tow truck. And there was no fix now going to happen on the spot. I was told that Volkswagen doesn't let them attempt that. But I was told I was entitled to a rental car. And I could probably ask for a lift to the rental company from the tow truck. Now, I'm stranded south of Belmullets. That's in a very rural part of the country. The nearest towns are Ballina, which is about an hour away, about 75, 80 kilometres away. Castlebar is about the same, about 80 kilometres away. Westport's further, maybe 90, 95 kilometres away. So, anyway, I was expecting a tow truck. But then an hour after that, at 2 o'clock, the AA stroke Volkswagen number called again saying, no, there now wouldn't be any tow truck that day. Now, this is Sunday. It's coming into the afternoon. I have to be back for sure on Monday evening. And now I'm being told there won't even be a tow truck until Tuesday because it had to be brought to a Volkswagen dealer. And these were all closed until Tuesday, the next working day, which makes sense. But I'm starting to wonder about this mobility guarantee. So I asked, well, okay, well, what's the mobility guarantee? Like, what am I supposed to do? So I was told, look, there's still a rental car option and I'll get a call back about it. So about 30 minutes later, I did get a call from a rental car company, from Europcar. It was 117 kilometres away in Knock Airport. Now, we are now at 2:30 p.m. They told me at Knock Airport, 117 kilometres away, they do have a rental car for me, but they'll be closing in 90 minutes. Now, it's not actually physically possible to get to Knock Airport from Belmullet in sort of under 90 minutes. So anyway, I asked about the next morning and also about Volkswagen's policy of entitling me to a taxi there if stranded. They didn't know anything about any taxi. They said that was between me and Volkswagen. And no accommodation or option was mentioned. So what they said to me was, look, call back tomorrow if you decide you want to get a car. So now I'm stranded. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I've no fix. I've no tow. I've no taxi. I've no rental car. And there's no accommodation offered. Because it's an EV, there's no local garage that will look at it either. Now, you might say the same about petrol or diesel cars, modern ones, hybrids. Some of those have policies and have setups that don't allow for local garages to tinker with them. That's a fair point. On the other hand, that's doubly so with EVs. A lot of local garages wouldn't know where to start. So anyway, at this point now I'm getting a bit annoyed. So I rang Volkswagen stroke AA, like Volkswagen for my contractual purposes, one last time. So we're now coming up to 3 o'clock on Sunday. I said, look, I've been through this rigmarole for the last 3.5 hours. What is going on? What should I do? I'm stranded here. You tell me what I should do. So the agent, apologized and said they'd call me back in a few minutes. And that was the last I heard from them that day. So now we're in Sunday afternoon. And if you remember the bank holiday weekend, this was sort of the middle of the really bad weather. So the wind was starting to pick up. Met Éireann was talking about another possible weather alert for the country. Now, I had to be back in Dublin the following day for a lot of important stuff on Tuesday. So I figure, I through my own resources, I stayed locally overnight. I have a setup down there. I was able to organise that. But the next day, it was clear to me, I'd been told repeatedly, there was no chance of my car being picked up the next day on the Monday. I was told also that, I had to make my own way to Knock Airport, 117 kilometres away if I wanted a rental car. So, those options were not options. So I ended up getting a lift to the local bus stop. The bus took me to the train station in Ballina, about an hour and 15 minutes away on the bus. Then the train took 3 hours and 40 minutes back to Dublin. And then I took a taxi from Houston Station back to my house. I mean, it was doable. I did it, but certainly kind of far away from Volkswagen's mobility guarantee. Anyway, that was the Monday night. So on the Tuesday, I was wondering, what was going to happen to my car. So there was no call, no text. So I rang at around maybe 10:30 to call about it. And the agent told me that it had just gone live, the issue, and that a tow truck should be there in 90 minutes. And that I'd get a WhatsApp when they're coming. So that was at 10 a.m. 11 a.m. past midday, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., no WhatsApp. So I called again at 2 p.m. and I asked what was happening. And I was told there's an ETA, an estimated time of arrival, at 10 past 3. So, in fairness, the tow truck, I did get a WhatsApp. I didn't get a WhatsApp. But I rang again later that afternoon. I was told that it had been towed. I think it was towed at 4 p.m. So it's 4 p.m. from rural Wild Atlantic Way, Mayo, to Ballina, where there is a dealer garage that can look at it. So that's Tuesday. That's Tuesday evening. Now, over the next week, I followed its progress, and the car wasn't actually diagnosed for a week. So I was told I would ring almost every day, and I was told by the garage that there was some confusion over who was qualified to look at it. And this is where your antennae go up again to think, oh, is this because I bought an EV? Is this like a really complicated system? One story I was given was that there was a qualified technician who was away on training. Another one was that it was a specialist warranty technician that had to look at it. So that dragged on for a few days. And so I finally, being a journalist, I didn't really want to invoke any privileges or anything like that. But as a journalist, I contacted Volkswagen to say, look, I'm going to write about this just because it's an interesting story from a point of view of a person who buys one of the best-selling brand of electric car, who takes it outside the city on a rural break on a bank holiday weekend, the kind of thing that loads of people imagine they might do. When you see an ad for a car from Volkswagen or any other car brand, often it's in some amazing Wild Atlantic Way location. And the message is pretty clear, like this is something that you would want to travel in. And also it now has the range to do so. So I said to Volkswagen that I'd write an article about it, just my own experience, and literally outline what I've just outlined now. And they came back and they held their hands up. They said, look, they apologized. They said we apologize for your experience with Volkswagen roadside assistance. They said it fell well below the level of service we deliver on a daily basis. And they said the matter is currently under investigation to establish where procedural shortcomings may have occurred, and promised appropriate measures will be implemented where necessary to ensure the situation does not occur. So I asked, I went back to them and I asked, well, what is it that would change? Like, if the same thing happened to me again, not even on a bank holiday weekend, let's say it was a normal Sunday, any Sunday. Let's say if the Sunday that my car wouldn't start had been a normal Sunday, what is it that was different where I was that would have resulted in either a tow truck coming out to tow it, or a car being supplied to me where I didn't have to travel 117 kilometers, or someone coming out to fix it? Now, the response I got back didn't really directly answer those questions, which leads me to wonder about how much structurally is different, and crucially for you, the listener listening to this, whether you would have a different experience to me if your electric car broke down either on a bank holiday weekend or on a Sunday in a remote part of Ireland, which again is about a third of the country. So it's not that this is, because I was talking to some people about this who are like me, EV owners, and who are generally like me, EV enthusiasts. And they're saying, yeah, but you see, like you were miles away from anywhere. Like you were really, really remote. That's rare. And it was a bank holiday weekend. And I kind of had to point out that if you look at a map of Ireland, if you look at counties like Mayo, Donegal, Kerry, large parts of Cork, Tipperary, Roscommon, Clare. I mean, I could go on. There are large parts of the country, I mean, at least a third of the country that you could say the same thing about. Quite rural, quite remote, at least 50 kilometres or 60 kilometres from a dealer or a rental car location. So my question was, what would be different? Let's say I'm stranded. Let's say it's midday on Sunday. How am I staying mobile that day? Will I get a car? Am I being reimbursed for a taxi? So they came back to me with a statement to again apologise. In fairness, they've been very polite and very nice and quite communicative. They said that the same procedures, and I'm quoting here, the same procedures for recovery and onward mobility apply regardless of whether the vehicle is electric or powered by an internal combustion engine. So that is another question, obviously, that we would have. Is there any difference between an EV and a normal petrol or a diesel car? Volkswagen says no. They say in situations like this, our roadside assistance partner, the AA Ireland, should have recovered the vehicle on the same day and arranged a hire car to ensure seamless onward travel. In your case, the rental provider advised that they were closing before you could reach their location. By the way, they were closing at 4 p.m. I mean, we can talk about 24/7 coverage. 4 p.m. So the roadside assistance rental car option that you have closes every day at 4 p.m. I'm not sure how great that is. Anyway, they say, however, access to replacement vehicle, Volkswagen goes on to say, should be available 24/7. And this gap in service has now been fully addressed within the AA Ireland's processes. So Volkswagen is saying now that maybe it's, whether it's on foot of this incident or by hook or by crook, if I were in that same situation, or if you, the listener, are in that same situation, that the AA will come out to you at 3 a.m. in the morning, or will deal with you and will provide you mobility if you break down or you're in that similar situation. I might actually test that, because it seems like a tall order for that to happen, to go from what happened to me to some sort of all-inclusive, yeah, we will definitely be out to you. I know it's a Sunday. I know it's, 6 p.m. or 2 p.m. or 10 p.m., but we're going to be out to you. We're either going to tow your car or we're going to fix it, and we're going to give you a rental car. I would be very surprised. I'd be very pleasantly surprised if that was the case. So there's a couple of questions here, and I'm conscious that I do have Darragh Nolan sitting beside me, and I've just been rabbiting on about this. One of the big questions is, would this have been the same with an electric car as a petrol or a diesel car? Now, Volkswagen say no, that's not the case. And I do know that with modern, Volkswagens, Audis, Mercedes, BMWs, I'm sure Toyotas, Hyundais, Kias, that to diagnose an issue, you kind of essentially have to put it onto a computerized machine. It's not something that someone with a wrench can go in and fix. I think that is a very solid point. On the other hand, it is also true to say that if your car breaks down and you're let down by your breakdown provider, as I was, as Volkswagen has apologized for, and that they have said very specifically that I was let down by my assistants, a local garage with a petrol or diesel car, depending on what the problem is, first of all, they will look at it. They may not look at it at all if it's an electric car. So that's worth bearing in mind. And I say that as somebody who's on my second electric car. I'm committed to electric cars. This is not an anti-electric car episode. This is an episode just to make you aware of what the potential hurdles are if you decide to buy an electric car. I wish people had said this to me when I was buying an electric car. I would have still bought one. And sales of electric cars are rising in Ireland very quickly. The latest figures that we saw that have been published show, I think they're up around 50% January to January. Now, last year was a decent year. So that's a very positive sign in terms of electric car adoption. That's largely because there are way more affordable options in the market. But so electric cars are rising. So the message here is don't change your plan to buy an electric car, but do be aware of what the potential downsides are if you break down somewhere remote. In other words, around a third of the country. If you decide to follow the message in the ads, which is to take your new car, your comfortable, really efficient, cheaper to run, by the way, electric car, and you take it down somewhere beautiful like the Wild Atlantic Way for a bank holiday weekend or on a Sunday, like the ads suggest that you could and you should. If you break down, you might have an issue. You might have an issue and you might be stranded like me. Volkswagen says that the issues have been fixed. Let's hope they have been. Anyway, Darragh, I've now finished my monologue. What do you think?
Well, as a Galway man, I have to say getting stranded in Mayo is perhaps my worst nightmare. But aside from that, now the thing that struck me about the whole thing was I think it really highlights that there's probably a much bigger hole in these guarantees being made by manufacturers than I think we realise. And you made that point about would it be the same thing if it wasn't an EV? And that point has been taken by Volkswagen and they've addressed that. But I just found that so interesting that there's probably a lot of people who will never have to use that type of service who think, isn't that great? You know, I've got a guarantee that if I ever have an issue that it'll be solved. And yet, as we see, the credulity of the word guarantee was very much stretched in your case.
Yeah, it was doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I mean, I think you're right. I think this is actually more a story about breakdown assistance than EVs or petrol or diesel cars. There is an element to it being an electric car for two reasons. First of all, because local garages are more reluctant to look at electric cars. So that is a fact. That's a material fact. And secondly, because there is still some sensitivity or tension among potential EV buyers about the vulnerability that they might face about being stranded. And unfortunately, if that is your sensibility, then this story is not going to give you more confidence because this is a breakdown assistance story. And in my case, I was really stranded. Like really stranded. If I hadn't had local connections, I would have been like in considerable. And if that had happened, like it broke down somewhere where I had recourse to shelter and everything. But if I had been up a mountain, like what I'm being told here is, I'm sorry, there's no one coming for you. No one.
Yeah.
And so now I'm trying to look up, local taxi companies in towns. Hi, I'm stranded here. If I give you my location, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And the complete reverse of that, God forbid you were in traffic on the M50. You know, like,
yeah,
it probably would have been more likely that you would have gotten help if you were in the middle of Dublin.
I think so.
But at the same time, you wouldn't have wanted to have been in a situation where you were holding up a lot of people behind you and something like that was happening, you know?
No. Now, look, I have had an issue before because I've written quite a bit about electric cars and I've broadcast quite a bit about electric cars. And I have a bit of a reputation as a whinge bag about them. Certainly among other motoring journalists. They don't really like some of the stuff that I point out being pointed out. But I've written a lot of positive things about electric cars as well. My own experience, because I'm quite unusual in a journalist in that I actually bought one. Mostly what you will read are like tests or reviews. And that's completely legitimate. I have no issue with that. But when you own one for a long time, you become a lot more finely tuned to the cons as well as the pros. Like, you know, range issues. I've gone on about this, so I'm not going to go on about it again. But it still is a bit of an issue, range in Ireland. with an electric car in a way that it is not at all with a petrol or a diesel car. And anyone who tries to dispute that or say that that's scaremongering, they're either lobbyists or they're part of the industry. They're just wrong, or they don't own an electric car, or they do own an electric car and they're part of some Reddit-style fan club. I like electric cars. I'm not going back to owning a petrol or a diesel car. But I do think it's important to point these things out. But I do have a reputation of a bit of whinge back. But a lot of what has irked me is about the way they're advertised and marketed. I went on an awful lot before about range issues and about not being told the full truth by dealers and by car companies about ranges. Like, that the advertised range will not just be a little lower, it'll be much lower in the cold. Like the weather we've had over the last 4 to 6 weeks, you can take at least 20% of your range, and probably more, probably about 30, 35% off your range. When you start your car in the morning, even if you're doing city driving, which electric cars are ideal for, by the way, they're incredibly efficient in traffic. But if you're doing a lot of short journeys and you're starting your car like maybe twice a day or 3 times a day, and it's cold outside, you lose a disproportionate amount of battery reserve in that first 2 minutes. So let's say you're at 80%. You're not supposed to charge it to more than 80%, by the way. It's another thing they don't really tell you until you're sort of in the last throes of buying one. But if you're at 80%, if it's a cold morning, you start your car, most people will find they will lose a full percent in the first, say, 60 to 90 seconds, even though that would normally take 5 minutes to lose a percent. And that's because it's so cold. That's because the cold has affected the battery range. So what got me here was the advertising of this mobility guarantee for ID3s and ID4s, for like mobility guarantee, that this guarantee, quote unquote, to keep you mobile, quote unquote, around the clock.
Unless it's
around the clock.
Unless it's 4 p.m. and your rental car spot is shut.
Unless it's a Sunday. Unless it's a bank holiday.
The problem that Volkswagen say has been rectified, which is hard to believe.
Unless you're in one of the areas of the country, about a third of the country.
Yeah, and like to your credit on the point about whether or not you're a whinge bag about EVs, like I think you've been very clear in your writing and on the podcast and everything that you are an EV owner, and as you said earlier, one who isn't going to go back.
Nope.
And
I'm committed.
Yeah, and you've also been very vocal about all of the positives. And like, to take something from my own life, my father has just recently switched to a plug-in hybrid. Mm-hmm. And our home house is very close to where he works back home in Galway. So he's very rarely using any fuel now in his day-to-day, because he's able to plug the car in at night, get up in the morning, go off to work. It's like an 8-minute drive down the road. Now it's probably a lot longer nowadays with the state of Galway City traffic at the moment. But as you said, they're incredibly efficient in traffic anyway, so it's not so much of a problem. So look, it's something that is worth pointing out, though, because like if we're here for nothing else, it's to point out when there are wrongs and to advocate for change as well.
That's what I believe on this issue. Now, just to restate what I've said before, I like my ID3. This is the second one I've owned. I like the look of it, the shape of it, the feel of it. I like how it drives. I lost a fortune when I traded in my first one for the second one. The depreciation was incredibly steep, but that was because of a largely once-off price depreciation issue, which really hit a lot of people badly. But that's the way it goes. But I like it, and I don't intend on selling this car or trading it in. That's not my issue. My issue isn't with the car.
There's a lot to be said for that as well. I know this is something that you've talked about before with tech, is that there is a lot to be said for liking using something and getting joy out of it. And one thing that, now I've never driven an EV personally, but one thing that strikes me about them is they look really modern inside and out. And there is I think something to be said for just that smoothness that you feel on the road driving an EV. And
Yeah, there
people
is.
complain about the quiet. It's something I actually really like.
Oh,
about
no.
an EV,
I
is
mean,
that
that-
is that the lack of noise? I think is just that's great.
Oh,
the noise of get rid of the noise of
absolutely.
cars forever. It's awful.
100%. And particularly if you live in a town or a city and you live beside a main road, my God, it's changing the livability of those places. But there's so much to like about driving an electric car. If you drive around town or you're driving cities, and you don't have to clutch and change gears all the time. To be clear, I can do that, and it wouldn't bother me massively if I do that for the rest of my life. But it is definitely a bonus not to have to do that, unless you're a total gearhead and you'd really love to have that manual control all of the time. They're faster. They, generally speaking, they accelerate much quicker, so they're much safer for overtaking on the road. They're much cheaper to run if you charge it at home. They're not cheaper to run if you're reliant on a public charger. If you live in an apartment, it's a bad idea from a financial point of view, relative to someone who has their own driveway. Because with a home charger, it costs maybe a third of what it costs me per kilometre to run a petrol car, a diesel car. Except for the fact that I broke down and it ended up costing me... The bus was actually really cheap, in fairness. From Belmullet to Ballina, I think it was €12. And then the train was really cheap. From Ballina, even though you have to change at Manolo Junction to Dublin, I think it was only €16. The taxi was more from Houston back to the...
that probably
It's
cost
actually
an arm
more
and leg.
expensive than...
Everything else put together.
Yeah, than everything else put together. But... yeah, but other than those costs, it's really affordable to have an electric car. Anyway, let's see how it progresses. Volkswagen says that the issue has been fixed and the AA has changed its systems. So I'd be very interested to hear any other, if any listeners have any similar stories, and whether they feel reassured by the outcome of this, if that indeed is the outcome. But for the moment, we're going to leave it there. My thanks to Darragh Nolan, who joined us today from the Irish Independent. Gav Hennessy was on sound, and JJ Clark produced this episode. I'm Adrian Weckler, and you've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.